I'm here with my No Cap Fund crew, Roger Scott and Walter Clapp. How are you guys doing today?
Great, Jeff. How are you?
I am good. We don't have a very special guest on the show today. We just have us, and we're just special. So let's go around the horn and introduce ourselves. Walter, why don't you start us out?
Absolutely. My name is Walter Clapp. I live in Laramie, Wyoming, where I practice law, and I also hail from the great state of Texas, where most of my family still lives. I'm a Republican, a Christian, and a father of 2 horses, 2 dogs, and a cat named Hawk. I'm also looking at our live stream, and it's saying the broadcast is not available.
What?
What? Ghost in the machine.
Is it available to any of you?
Ay, ay, ay.
Content not available.
It's showing up on my end. I see it.
From your Jeff Mayhew page?
Yes, I see it from both pages.
Okay. Well, then let's just assume it's working. Sorry for that brief interlude while we navigated Walter's technical difficulties.
That's okay. You know, it'll be okay. All right. So now that we've cleared up the fact that something's not working on Walter end, but according to my end, everything is streaming properly. Roger, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. My name's Roger. I'm a CPA in North Carolina, father, 2 children, all adults. And I'm just bummed about the representation situation in our country. Have been for a few years since I discovered it, and channeling my unhappiness into something productive, which is why we're here.
It's always good to channel emotions into productive action, isn't it? I am Jeff Mayhew. I am the vice president of No Cap Fund. I also own a small business with my wife where we print T-shirts locally here in the Northern Virginia area. I'm born and raised in Gainesville, Virginia. I actually live in the same neighborhood I grew up in. My dad and my brother are my neighbors, which is pretty cool. I'm a distant ancestor to James Monroe. My family's been living in the Northern Virginia area, farming the land since the Revolutionary War, which is also pretty cool. Actually, since before that. Yeah, I'm a dad of 5, and same thing with the other guys. I mean, I read a lot of history, I study a lot of books, and one word kept on coming up, and that word was representation. We have a serious issue, and you know, I can sit around and let that emotion fester inside me and get angry and yell at a lot of people, or I can turn it into action, which is what I've done here with Walter and Roger. So tonight's episode's a little bit different. As I mentioned, we don't have a special guest. Last week we had a one-on-one episode with Kyle Sweetser, so we're gonna go over that just a little bit. Allow Roger and Walter to chime in on what they thought about the interview and the conversation that we had. Then we're going to talk a little bit about an article that Walter had found called "The King and the Swarm," and we're going to talk a little bit about the Gaza peace deal as well before we end the show out. Before we get into our first segment, I just want to go over a couple of things that we've been working here at No Cap Fund. Obviously, you've heard us talk about our declaration for representation. You can go to our website, www.y435.org. You can read our declaration and sign it. We are slowly but surely racking up signatures one by one. We're at 62, which I know doesn't sound like a lot, but it's better than where we started. You know, we'd love for you to help us boost those numbers. Go to our website. If you believe in the message of representation, you believe that the House needs to be uncapped, read our declaration and sign it. If you have a problem with our declaration, send us an email. Explain to us why. What is stopping you from signing that declaration? We'd love to know. And then, as you see, I've got a new T-shirt here, the No Cap Fun T-shirt. And check out my sleeve here with the American flag and the website on the side. We are putting together a swag package. Look, Walter's got the leather notebooks. So we're putting together some swag. It'll be available on the website. Hopefully by the end of the month. Just be patient with us. We're all volunteers raising families, human or horse. That keeps us busy. So just like I said, be patient. And then one really awesome piece of news is one of our interns, James, has started the Representation Coalition at the University of Pittsburgh. It is officially official now. They're doing meetings once a week, and we're so excited about that. And since I've given a shout out to James, I also want to give a shout out to Joey, who got an article about uncapping the House published in his school website, school paper. Where is that article? Hold on, so I can get the name right here. It is called "Why the House of Representations is Capped at 435 Members." It's at andrews.edu. I'll put this out and tweet it out after the show so you guys can find it and take a look at it. So, part of what we're doing here is trying to educate people, bring new people into the fold, help them share the message of representation with others. And we're just really happy to have such ambitious young people working hard on the ground for us. So thank you both for doing all that hard work. All right, guys, let's get into the show. What do you think about last week's show? What do you think about Kyle? Put politics aside, what do you think about Kyle as a person?
I liked it. I liked the pushback that you gave him, because I definitely think he gave some political bullshit answers, and you called him out on it, which is important. I think in particular you were talking about how to kind of, how do you build a bridge between the two parties, right? And win a Democratic Senate seat in deep red Georgia, or Alabama. And he just like went off the rails and was just like, everything that Trump is doing is unconstitutional. And you're like, well, okay, how does that get you votes? How is that building a bridge? So I think that he seemed like a relatively genuine guy. I think he needs to lean into just being a genuine guy and not the political talking points of the Democratic Party. That would be my advice to him if he listens to this.
Roger, thoughts?
Yeah, you're gonna hate this. I haven't seen it. I couldn't find it at the time on Monday night, and I got distracted. I'm a CPA, and corporate taxes with extensions are due like in 2 days, so I've been stressed. And I had to go out of town for the weekend. I just never got back to it. I apologize. But you can watch it now that I've embarrassed myself.
Don't worry about it. It's all good. Like I said, we're all very busy people. We're all volunteers. We're just trying to do the best that we can. What I'll say to Walter, what he said is, and I hope that this is okay. I hope Kyle doesn't mind. We talked briefly before the show started, and the first question that I asked for the show, I basically asked before the show started, and I got a very different answer. It was similar, but different. And what I mean by that is it was very authentic, and it was very who Kyle is. And that person really, I don't necessarily know if the Senate is the spot for him, but that is the type of person we need in the House of Representatives. And he told a story about being a small business owner, about, recognizing the challenges of regulation, of, speaking to somebody in power, like all these different things he spoke about very authentically. He never mentioned Trump once. And then when the show started, Trump just kept coming out. And I think that is, that is the failing of the Democratic Party right now, is they just can't stop. They can't help themselves of pushing back, which again is like, that's kind of the thing that Trump did that people don't like, is like, there's always pointing the finger somewhere else. And it's like, okay, cool. we all have problems that we can all agree on. Let's talk about those and let's talk about how we can solve them. What I will say is that, to Kyle's credit, even during the show, he did pivot on his own. And I think he recognized this at some point. I think if you watch in the first segment of the show, he made a comment to that of like, well, that wasn't really it. And he kind of pivoted and he started talking about the Obama era, right? Because back then he was a Republican. He was a Trump supporter too. And he was still kind of talking about that, like, Trump is the problem issue. And overall, what I would say is he's new to politics, and he probably has a group of advisors that, are kind of pointing him in a direction. And my guess is his biggest supporters really don't like Trump. And so that means that it's an easy thing for him to talk about to get applause or to get support. And when you're running for Congress, you need a lot of support. And I think it can be like a false sense of security when you get that really strong base of small support, but you're not able to extend it to a larger sphere, which, I said something to him before we got off the show about, just be wary of that, like be wary of this. And I think that Kyle seems to be a really decent human being, which I think is important to have in Congress. And I've been following him for some time now, and he's most certainly educated himself on the issues on the ground of Alabama. You can tell that he's actually out there meeting with people because the way he talks about things has changed, and he has a little bit more depth of knowledge about some certain issues. There's definitely places where he needs to work on, but I mean, that's all of us, right? We always need to be working on things. So I would say overall, good person. I think he has a fair shot if first he's got to win the Democratic primary, right? And then if he wins the Democratic primary, he needs to be bold. He really needs to be bold. And being bold would be, I know he said to stay away from the cultural issues is what he wants to do. I think he just needs to be common sense about the cultural issues. If he can be common sense about the cultural issues and if he already has the primary nomination of the Democratic Party and the Republicans don't put up anybody that has any sense, then I think he's got a shot. He can start to pull in donations from outside of the typical Democratic sphere.
Y'all didn't talk about this, but who currently occupies the seat that he is vying for?
I think it's Tuberville, and Tuberville's running for governor now.
Interesting.
Has he moved back to Alabama, or is he still living in Florida, Tuberville?
But that's one of the things that I think Kyle is kind of frustrated with. Is like he doesn't actually live in Alabama.
Right, and the law says.
Which is too bad because Gulf Shores is a very nice place. Why live in Florida if you could live in Gulf Shores, Alabama? That's the question I would ask Mr. Tuberville. Sorry to give you, Roger.
Which one has the income tax and which one doesn't?
Ding, 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 ding. The CPA in with the swing and the home run.
Tuberville's got all that. He's got all that Auburn money. He's got to protect it.
Man. So the other thing I think that Kyle needs to be wary of is like if he wants to be common sense about the cultural issues, he needs to be more common sense about the J6 stuff, because that also is like there are two sets of facts that exist in our world, and I don't frankly buy either of them. And it actually, neither of you may know this, but I actually announced my presidential campaign back when I ran for the Republican primary on January 6th, because one of my talking points was, whatever happened.
How did we miss that news on that day? Seriously, why was that not the center of the news cycle that day? That's what I want to know.
Well, no. But this was 2023. I announced January 6th, 2023.
Okay.
So, but I did it symbolically because, my point was, the primary investigating body of, into that event was Congress, right? What was the body which failed in some ways and is a failed, body. And so, my point was, whatever happened, I don't trust the January 6th committee, right? I've worked on committees. I don't buy the report that they put out, right? And I would love to have an unlimited amount of time so I could pour through everything myself. And obviously, Trump has a lot of blame. I think there's also a decent case to be made that Nancy Pelosi intentionally did not call in the National Guard troops, which Trump did authorize ahead of time. And why didn't she do that? And so it's not to say that Trump shouldn't shoulder blame. He absolutely should. But it also doesn't mean that everyone that was in the crowd that day should be facing 20-year felonies and pleading out to the destruction of their life. Did they make a mistake? Yes, but was that mistake comparable to the mistakes made during the BLM riots? Right. I think that is the view from the right is just like, these people were kind of political prisoners, and I think it's just important. I think for him, if he's going to make a serious go in Alabama, I think he's got to dig into that topic a little bit more and refine his talking points. He can't just say, and he can say, January 6th kind of, I was initially infuriated, but as I dug deeper, I've learned more and it's more nuanced, right? Because that's everything, right? there. Anytime you say, oh, it's just a slam door, COVID is 100% Dr. Fauci's fault. It's like, well, no, right? Like, it's complicated, right? It's a very complicated story. And so that would be my second piece of advice to him is he's got to, I think he's got to develop some nuance on the topics in which there's two sets of facts, right? And that, one of those is the cultural issues, but there are a couple others. And January 6th would just be one.
So I'm curious about something here because I hear this a lot that, January 6th, BLM.
You're very quiet, Roger. I can barely hear you.
Sorry. I'm on AirPods. Is that any better?
I hear you good.
Okay. Maybe it's just me. Sorry, keep going.
No, because I hear a lot of that. BLM, January 6th, what's the difference? It's all the same. And I think they are fundamentally different. One was attacking us. It was a semi-organized group attacking a seat of government. And the other was kind of an organic riot that grew out of frustration with things that were happening on the street in real time. Nobody in BLM was trying to overthrow a freaking government, right? Nobody.
I don't think that anyone. I don't think that there's a good argument that the people that actually entered the Capitol, that the majority of them were actually trying to overthrow our government. I think that they were trying to delay a certification of the electoral votes. And we've talked about this, Jeff. What was the precedent for this? The 1864 Warren G. Harding, slate of fake electors.
No, you're thinking of not Warren G. Harding was in the 1920s. It's oh my goodness, it was the Compromise of 1870.
Okay.
Well, all I'm saying is they brought a dang guillotine to the grounds on January 6th. They had a guillotine out there, right? Maybe it would have worked, maybe it wouldn't, but
well, so
Tilden
they
Hayes.
were definitely
Tilden and Hayes. So it was Tilden and Hayes. It was 1870. It was the election of Samuel Tilden and Rutherford B. Hayes. The Republicans and the Democrats on both sides had participated in massive election fraud. Some of it violent, some of it less violent. They were several states that the electors was in dispute. Basically they couldn't decide who won the presidency, and there was a special committee put together of Supreme Court justices, congressional representatives that voted on the presidency. This is basically what happened was they made a compromise where the Republicans got the presidency and Reconstruction ended. Federal troops were removed from the South. Ultimately, I think that's what Trump and his supporters were trying to do. They were trying to create a situation where there was a special committee that was going to decide the presidency and that the electors weren't going to be certified, and they were trying to delay the electors by it. I do think there was an organized event to make that happen. I do not think the majority of people at January 6th were in on the organization. This is the almost brilliance of what Trump did by making it a national spectacle, by tweeting about it, by talking about it, by holding a rally. He was able to bring regular people who had no idea what was going on, and they were surrounded by, or in the midst of those regular people were probably a very small group of people that were intent on creating as much ruckus as possible. Now, let's look at the Nancy Pelosi thing. This was political games on her part. She should have absolutely brought them in earlier. But my guess is they wanted to try to get him impeached so he could not run for president again in the future, which they failed to do, obviously. And I bet you, if you were able to talk to a lot of representatives and congressmen off the record, I bet you they know a lot more than we do. And I bet you that they probably, some of them, didn't vote the way that we think they should have voted because they understand that there was political games at foot. And I think that political games are dangerous in a situation like this. I think what Donald Trump did was dangerous. I think Nancy Pelosi not acting was dangerous. Donald Trump not acting on that day. He could have sent out a tweet at any point in time, and he kept on delaying. Overall, I think we were just in a situation where we had a whole bunch of really bad leaders making bad decisions. And then to Roger's point about BLM, it was not an organized plot to overthrow the government, but there were a lot of organized people trying to create chaos, and that's not good either. And
George
you know,
Floyd, I mean, I think that it's important. It's important to
well,
dig into
no,
the
I know.
details of George Floyd. I don't know if you have, but go ahead, Roger.
Sorry, I didn't hear what you said.
Walter says we need to know all the true conditions about George Floyd. All I'm saying is conditions on the street perpetrated by the police. Organically, people freaked out about that in Minneapolis. Around the nation was a different story, but in Minneapolis it started because what they saw police doing to a person on the street pissed them off.
Yeah, but
they weren't invited. Nobody told them, "Hey, be in Minneapolis on this date. It will be wild." They weren't invited to come and be wild. It happened.
Well, so what I would say is there's, again, it's similar to the January 6th thing. A small group of people are organized to create chaos, and they take advantage of an organic event where people come together. And this is the danger whenever you get a large body of people together. This is the danger that happens, which by the way makes what Trump did almost way worse, because he's the president of the United States and he should know better, and he should have been prepared for that to happen, which I think ultimately he was prepared for that to happen. That's why he did it. That's why he did it, and that's why he sat on his thumbs and didn't do anything to stop it for a really long period of time, or didn't do enough to stop it for a long period of time.
And not nearly enough people were prosecuted as a result of that. The higher ups, we never got to prosecution. The whole thing's just been a bloody disaster from a rule of law standpoint.
I guess I would just say I think I view the George Floyd protests and the BLM summer as or I think the right views it as equally as counterproductive to the rule of law, because it does seem like there were facts intentionally obfuscated for the benefit of creating social unrest and anger, rage baiting, so that more people would show up to the polls.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I mean, it was May 20. It was May 2020, right? I mean, so this it directly affected the 2020 election.
Okay.
So
every event in 2020 affected the election.
Yeah. But look at the original. So I mean, just a few details here. So the original autopsy report of George Floyd said he died of asphyxiation. He was high on fentanyl, at least 2 or 3 other substances. He was resisting. Derek Chauvin used a tactic that was approved by the police force, by his specific police force. And then, everyone and their mom is enraged about this person, this one singular event. And I guess to me, based on the media news cycle, it felt contrived to me. I think looking at it, I think it's a fair accusation or question to raise. And if that is true, right? If it was contrived in some way by, let's just say like what the allegation is, like, Soros backed type, not NGOs or groups that were kind of fomenting protests. We've seen lots of documented cases of paid protesters. If that were true, and I'm just telling you, there's a large majority of the Republicans that believe that to be true. If that is true, then that is I think if you can put yourself in that headspace of them believing that, it starts to color. I think I can understand how they look at that as being something very similar to January 6th, where there are other allegations of agent provocateurs being in the crowds, kind of urging the crowd on, not just Trump, right, but people that wanted this to happen so that they could impeach Trump. And again, I don't know, right? I'm not a judge or a jury. I look at this swarm of facts, and without reading detailed books and like digging into all of this, it's very difficult to know. And that actually, I think, brings us somewhat naturally to the King and the Swarm. If we're ready to transition, I'm also happy to stay here if you want.
Yeah, no, so I'll let it go. We need to move on, but we're going.
I mean, this is fun. I think that this is good, right? Like these topics are important.
All those details you mentioned about the autopsy report and so forth, that's great. But that would have been lost on the crowd on the day if it had been known on the day.
Well, the protest was the next day. It wasn't on the day of. It was the next day.
The day of the riot is what I meant to say. The autopsy, all those details would have come out, weeks, months later? It wouldn't have mattered on that day. They saw what they saw. And on top of that, there had been how many cases in the news in the past 4 or 5 years of police involved killing black men, shooting black men to death, right? There's been a lot of that stuff going on. The pressure keeps building. And then the people are on the street and they see it happening live and they get upset and they riot. Okay, it happened organically. There may have been people who egged it on, and there may have been all these other influences involved, but the people on the street saw what they saw in real time with all this pressure that had been built up, and they lost it.
Well, so what I would say to Walter, what you were talking about it being contrived, is I don't think that it was contrived for electoral purposes. I think that if it's contrived for anything, it's contrived for profit. It draws people's eyeballs to the television screen, and again, there is this element of social justice that is profitable that we just cannot ignore, because a lot of these things we find out later that they weren't really the way that we thought they were, and the media's rush to judgment on these things. You talk about they saw it in real time. Maybe the media needs to slow down and stop showing things in real time, investigate the situations, and report them once they have the facts. And maybe we won't have such, violent, protest. And then, again, tying this back to the January 6th thing, the difference here between the BLM and the January 6th is Donald Trump is president of the United States. It was contrived for a specific purpose. He did organize it. He did call people to the Capitol, regardless if it maybe it got out of hand, maybe it wasn't supposed to be the way it was. Again, it's a matter of responsibility. Who has responsibility? Who has the authority? Donald Trump had both the responsibility and the authority. He could have done something. When you're talking about the BLM, there is no single point of contact. There is no single point of authority that organized that. It is somewhat organic because you can't predict that this event's going to happen. Yes, there is pressure building up with all these different things, and yes, there's probably agitators ready to go at any point in time. But again, I think that they are two separate things, both very serious. There is a lot of accountability to go around. And I think ultimately, I think we can all agree on this. If we had a Congress that was properly apportioned, that could actually connect with their constituents, we might actually know the truth, and we might not have to lean on a media that is rushing to judgment because it's profitable to get the story out fast, as opposed to investigate the story and share the actual facts.
All right, Jeff, you're getting wound up. Turn the volume down a little.
Sorry. All right, let's go.
This is a good time. This is a good segue.
Yeah. So, and I have a quote. So, I was sent an article by someone in the administration, a political appointee in the Trump administration. He said, "You need to read this article," and it's in the magazine First Things, which is kind of a Christian-oriented political news magazine. And this piece is written by Mary Harrington, Harrington, and her article is called "The King and the Swarm," and it's principally about the profound changes that affected society as a result of the invention of the printing press, and then subsequently broadcast media, and then social media. So we kind of have three stages, right? Printing press, news and TV, radio,
Mass media.
social media. And this is the quote that I think encapsulates, what the right sees. And I think it's the Christian right. I mean, we have to be aware that this is a increasingly widely held philosophical viewpoint. In which he says is, as the electorate both expanded and began to discard print for broadcast, supranational and pre-political forms of governments also expanded, colloquially, the deep state. So I think what she's saying here, and I think what the allegation is from the likes of people such as Mike Benz, popular on X, is that, in fact, our news media organizations, broadcast TV and radio, were co-opted by the centralized powers that arose coming out of World War I and World War II, around the time that the House was capped, to essentially decide policy and then build narratives to support it, right? And that is why the right, many on the right, have eschewed the media largely. And it is, I think, what they see in the build-up to the BLM summer as, Jeff says profit motive. I think Mary Harrington would say, you're creating division for political aims, right, to service the administrative bureaucracy. So I want to back up and give a little bit more context for this article. So, her thesis is that essentially the printing press was invented, and then suddenly the entire world became literate. And that was a huge change because it meant we all got smarter very quickly, right? That all of a sudden
it changed our way of thinking, she says.
It was much less expensive to educate yourself, right? You didn't have to be in the top 1% to, go to these storied institutions that had these vast libraries of handwritten texts. Instead, you could get these mass produced copies and you could start to learn. And that really was, in a lot of ways, it transformed Christianity, because suddenly people could read the text for themselves and they didn't need these priests in church to interpret it for themselves. So we have Luther and the Protestant Reformation. But also it gave way to the American Revolution, which really was, I think in a lot of ways, it was a intellectual revolution from the Enlightenment era. And her argument is that basically that died. That, in a lot of ways, with the advent of broadcast to a certain extent, but really with social media and the shrinking of our attention span, we're not as smart, right? In the kind of long-form, deep dive sense that we once were. She does point out that actually kids are getting somewhat better at pattern recognition, basically contextualizing different patterns and seeing them. However, by and large, much worse at, holding and retaining facts. What is terrifying about her piece is that the solution she proposes is that we need a king, right? For this, the swarm mentality that is driven by the social media landscape. And obviously, I think fundamentally, I only want a king if that king is giving away power back to Congress, right? I in my mind, I hold out hope for the possibility that it could be the executive branch ultimately that decides to drive a piece of legislation to uncap the House and give power back, just like George Washington did. You know, he could have been a king. He arguably was a king, but he decided to do the beneficent thing and give power back to the people. And you know, the problem I see, or that we've talked about often here, is that ultimately, you know, because Congress was capped in 1929, same year that the stock market crashed, a few years after the creation of the Federal Reserve, a few years after women got the vote, and you know, since then, Congress has been delegating power to the executive branch, and it's just been getting stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger. And you know what Mary Harrington, I think, correctly points out, the criticism from the right of, say, the Biden presidency, right, is that ultimately you could have a president who was no president at all, and said you have this vast kind of bureaucratic quagmire and an auto pen, and they are running everything, right? It's a technocracy or a technocratic elite that is running a vast executive branch with essentially the authority of a king, the ability to sway Congress to their needs, right? Let's pass another Patriot Act. Let's pass, whatever tools we need to surveil the people. And the right, I think, says, well, at least we know, Trump is actually in charge. And the left is like, no, we want the technocracy. And I think what we're saying here is, no, let's revest the power with actual human beings in a House of Representatives, so that we can actually start to re-educate the public, right? Start bringing back long-form education. We see a thirst for this, right? She doesn't mention it, but there are long-form podcasts are a thing for a reason. Like, people do thirst for this. We just are increasingly busy. People do still read books. And if we had a renaissance of legislative power, my belief, because the definition of representation is two-way education, right? The representatives, the good representatives, fundamentally, they're going to be pushing books in long-form education back on the people, not just clips, right? And kind of tying this all back to our previous conversation, it's like people get incensed when they see George Floyd get murdered or die, period, because it's this like short form clip of just like, it's right in their face and like you can see it and and in that sense totally organic. Same thing with Charlie Kirk, right? You see that happen, but you're not reading it in a book, right? You're not getting all the context. You're just reacting in real time to, what are just increasingly crazy things. And you don't have somebody to call to try to make sense of it all. And it just is this self-reinforcing, wheel of doom. And so that is what I want to say about that article. And I think I'm happy to pause here on this article if you want to chat about it a little bit. But I think a great piece out of it is Jeff's most recent article with The Vital, which is Go Touch Grass, right? Because what we see fundamentally is that there are people across the political spectrum that recognize the commonality of the problems, and they all have a lot of different solutions, but the one thing they seem to keep agreeing on is uncapping the United States House of Representatives. So I'll turn it over to y'all. Take it away.
So I'll go to, you mentioned what I was talking about with the prophet, and you talked about like the deep state. And what I'll say is there is no one thing. There is never any one thing that creates problems. It's always a multiplicity of things. And while I think that what you're saying is there has definitely been people in our government that try to use their power to manipulate the ends of their means, right? And I think that there's definitely people in the media that try to use their power to profit as much as possible. And I think the safeguard against that is a well-established, properly apportioned house, because it makes it more difficult to do that when you properly disperse power, so it doesn't become concentrated in a shadowy figure or a outside institution. And in one of the things that she wrote in her article, let me pull it up here. The decline in reading is directly linked to the spread of digital alternatives. And, I gotta say, I grew up never reading. Like I did not read. I managed to get through all of school with, I think I probably read maybe one full book, like actually read a book. I think I've read one through all of high school, or by graduating high school. It was always something. I started to read books, but I could never finish them. I'd always get distracted. I was a very busy kid as far as like I wanted to be outside playing and whatever, and I was glued to television. I was a movie buff. I watched everything that came out. And as life got more difficult and I had child after child, and the business presented challenge after challenge, at some point I wanted to better myself and I started reading. And kind of that what she's talking about, where like now that you can actually have all this learning at your fingertips, the people became woke, for the lack of a better term, right? Is they learned a lot of information that they thought they maybe knew, but they were getting it filtered through different people, and they didn't maybe know everything. Because like we were talking about before, what I was just saying is it's never one thing. The people that are talking to you are probably telling you the truth. They're just probably telling you part of the truth. And by adding in all the different variations of that truth, you're able to see a clearer, more crisp picture and make maybe different decisions on what you're doing. And, if tying it to my article, that is kind of the key, right? All of these three people that I write about, it's Yuval Levin, it's Patrick Deneen, and it's Osita Nwale. And you guys have heard me talk about this on the show. They've all written books about the problems that we face today in the government. And they all have different solutions to that problem. And they all agree on one of them being uncapping the House, because they recognize that this is a significant issue that we need to address. And to that point about the political sphere and the media sphere, they don't want to talk about this stuff because it devalues their power. It makes it harder. We wouldn't need media as much, or big media as much. Andrew Yang writes about this a little bit in his book Forward about the death of local media, right? And I think the death of local media is directly linked to the capping of the House, because as the population grows and those seats become more and more powerful, it becomes more and more important for like federal, a federal media, a large national media to get attention, because less and less people are watching local media. And I think by uncapping the House, you're not going to have, it's not like the media is going to go away. That's never going to happen, right? What you're going to have is you're going to have a decentralization of media. You're going to have more players in the sphere, which we already see with X. And you talked about Mike Benz, and there's lots of other people out there that are kind of these, what, for lack of a better term, fringe media personalities that, again, I think that it's good and it's bad, right? It's good because you need more voices in the sphere. It's bad because the ones that typically rise during this era are radicals, and radicals, they engage people based on emotion and partial facts of what their motives are that make them money. It's really no different than what you would accuse the national media of doing either, right? And I think that what you need is again a properly apportioned House. You need people in the media sphere that are actually interested in research and investigation and talking about facts. To your point, the people that you should be listening to are the people telling you to read books. The people that are willing to do a long form podcast and give lots of different information about it. And there's ways to manipulate that as well, but I think you're best suited there than the 90-second clip that you see on Instagram, right? Because a 90-second clip on Instagram could be anything.
which we will be making from this show.
Well, of course we will, because it's the only way to get somebody's attention.
Roger,
you're on mute.
I gotta go show you something. I'm gonna go grab it off my wall, and I'll be right back.
Roger, you're good.
Yeah. Yeah, it was interesting you talk about not reading when you were growing up. I didn't read a whole lot just for pleasure, just reading books to read them. But I read myself to sleep with the World Book Encyclopedia. Went through the whole set and started back through. I learned so much useless stuff. It's amazing.
It's funny. My grandfather had a set of those, and I didn't read them like that, but I did memorize. It's funny because I did memorize all the presidents and vice presidents, because it had like that page with all the pictures of it, which is, I guess it's just who I am. Because when I first started reading, when I did read some books when my early 30s with my wife. We decided we were going to turn the TV off and we were going to start reading together. And we read like When Beale Street Talks and High Fidelity, just some like pleasure reading stuff. But when I really committed to educating myself, the thing that I picked up was presidential biographies, right? And I have since read a presidential biography of every president up through Ronald Reagan. George H.W. Bush is the next on my list, and I've read like 3 or 4 on Madison. I've read 2 on McKinley. So multiple ones on different presidents. Again, back to the point is like you got to get multiple perspectives to really understand what's going on. Go ahead, Walter.
Okay, so I got to show you all something. So this was given to me. I won't say by exactly who, but this is a map of Taiwan.
Uh-oh.
And you'll see here, the important point is so they also designated the Republic of China, so some nice diplomatic stuff. But I talk often about AI, and this is what I wanted to bring it back to, just touch on one thing in Mary Harrington's article. So Taiwan is super important because they host the TSMC. Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Corporation, which manufactures a ton of very important chips for various entities that are making AI class chipsets. And so her second to last, chip war, totally. Her second to last paragraph in her article reads as follows. As AI agents improve to the point of shrinking the administrative class, we may find that what actually has the power to destroy the 20th century technocracy is not free markets and personal responsibility, or even anons posting memes, but developments in AI. If so, classical liberals may be disappointed to discover that just as civil discourse is not coming back, what comes after the deep state will not be a return to small and limited Republican government. It is more likely to be a big government mediated by big data, crunched by machine agents, and a now almost entirely digital swarm. Should this outcome be realized within the legacy democratic paradigm, it will inevitably result in governance that is still more impersonal, less accountable, and less capable of friendship for those ruled than the impersonal, unaccountable bureaucrats it has rendered obsolete. Right. So she's saying we've had this technocracy. The auto pen technocracy, and it's just going to be replaced by AI bots who are going to be administered by Palantir and these other giant entities. And what I say in rejoinder to this, Miss Mary Harrington, is actually there's another path. And that is if we empower each of our representatives in an expanded House with its own AI agent, and if that AI agent is trained on the same data, the Library of Congress, but they can adjust their weights and measures, what we can do is create a competing field of AI bots that are actually fact checking each other and making the world more factual. That is a realistic possibility, a possible outcome from the AI revolution, but it is not a possibility if you take a top-down approach to AI, which is what she sees. She sees a top-down approach to AI coming forward, and that's certainly going to be the case from China and potentially Taiwan. But that should not be our approach. Our approach should be bottom up with AI, and that is only possible with an uncapped House.
So I think it's kind of it's funny the way that she talks about sorry, I lost my train of thought there. The king, the idea of the king, right? And you mentioned Biden and the technocratic whatever is in Congress not really having any type of real sway. It was reported recently that the administration, the Trump administration, is bragging privately about how they are ruling over Congress. And you talk about the technocratic top-down agency, and if you look at the quote new right and the financial support that backs the Trump administration, J.D. Vance, Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, these are not people that are going to want to let their power go. And so I do agree with you.
Power. Ultimately, Trump does.
So
yeah.
Yes, true. But it's not like they're not trying to get it, right? Like that's why they are where they are. That's why they put that guy there, is because they thought it provided them a better shot at the power than maybe the other guy. And again, ultimately, you know, for people to protect themselves, they have to speak for themselves. If it's going to be in a bottom-up approach, then I think all of the things that we're talking about, a decentralized media where regular people get involved and start local outlets and educate themselves and educate groups, is a way to go. People,
There's no market for that. There's no market for that anymore.
I mean, there was no market for it. I would argue that there probably is now, and nobody's taking advantage of it because we've burnt ourselves out on everything else at this point. And I think people are looking for something new. And I think that happens. Life is cyclical. History doesn't repeat, but it does rhyme. And, you know, these things come back and forth. And so, you know, I lost my train of thought there. Heartache.
Well, hold on. I just for the listeners, and because maybe we'll clip this.
Hold on, real quick.
Go for it.
J.P. Morgan just announced a massive investment into new industries, right? And if J.P. Morgan and Apple announced a massive investment, I think OpenAI had a massive investment. This is the third massive investment from a large corporation. And if this is done right, I think it can work. If it goes down to the people, if there's an open AI source, if new businesses and new power centers are created in that technology center, then I think that we are successful. And I talk about this all the time, okay? Centralized power doesn't work long time. It always blows up, okay? And I go back to the Reed Ender's game, man. The buggers, man. The buggers were a centralized power, all right? It took a group of adaptable, talented individuals to take them out. And ultimately, that's what guerrilla warfare is a lot of ways. That's what the Revolutionary War was. That's what, you know, if you look at the Vietnam War, right? Like that was the overall like problem is you can't defeat these small centers of power. You can't get rid of them completely, but you can, you know, allow them to have representation and speak for themselves at some point in time. Go ahead, Walter.
Yeah, well, and but Mary's conclusion is, and she says, this is the final paragraph. If this happens, right, this AI takeover of the technocracy, and I think it will, the return of the king will not only be possible, but urgently necessary. Left headless, an algorithmic swarming regime of mechanic proceduralism would represent the most monstrous pseudo-democratic tyranny of all. Our best safeguard against this fate is the ordering power of a human ruler with a human head capable of prudence and justice and a human heart capable of friendship. And I think what is kind of crazy making about this conclusion for me is twofold. So, our best safeguard is not a king with power over AI. I think that is what China has, and that is that we're not going to outcompete that. I don't think there's any world in which we outcompete China in a top.
And that may work in their society, but it would not work here.
Exactly. I mean,
It'll
the
work
people here would just
temporarily. It'll work temporarily in their society.
Right. And so the second thing that is crazy making about this whole situation is the idea that Trump could be a great king, right? Which is, she doesn't say that explicitly, but it's kind of the implication, right? Or maybe she's saying it's going to be J.D. Vance. But like, Trump doesn't read, right? He watches things. He's not a reader. And again, I'm holding out hope that he's going to recognize all of this. There's some small, iota of a chance, and he's going to force an uncapping bill tied with kind of this AI plan that I've just laid out, before 2028. And because maybe even though he's not a deep reader, he is decent at pattern recognition, and or very good at it, right? I don't want to discredit his lifetime. He has more than 40,000 hours under his belt, and he certainly has been through his number of battles. And so if there is a chance, right, that ultimately he is going to consolidate all of this power over the next couple of years, and that he could give it away. There's also the chance that he's going to consolidate it, and he's going to give it to, he's going to hand the baton to J.D. Vance or whomever else.
Junior.
And
no, it's going to be Barron.
deeply
It's going to be
dangerous.
Barron. It's going to be Barron Trump.
He won't be old enough.
It doesn't matter. If
Does
you're
that
if
matter?
you're
Does that stop
if
him?
if you're gonna say he's going to hand the power to somebody,
Yeah.
at that point it's already doesn't matter, right? He can't
Well,
hand
that's
the power to
okay,
somebody.
right? But like, let's. You know what I'm saying? I'm saying he's going to endorse a future candidate. I'm not saying I'm not saying he's capable of physically handing the power. I think he's going to endorse a future presidential
He's trying
candidate
to get
that
there.
is likely to win.
He's trying to get there, which is why he's never going to give back power to the people.
Well,
You continue to hold out hope. I have no hope.
well,
Hey, you got. I have hope. I always have hope. Whether I think it's slim hope or not, I always have hope.
Just one cat. No.
There's a lot of bad people in history that have done good things. So I mean, you just
I don't disagree. I'll be happy to be wrong, but I don't think
somebody
I
that
am.
we celebrate all the time that was really just like a really terrible human being is John Brown, right? Like people celebrate him as a hero for the abolitionist movement, but he was just a butcher. He went to Kansas and he just butchered a whole bunch of people who disagreed with him. Not just killed them, but mutilated their bodies so their wives couldn't even see them anymore. He was a failed whatever it was at life, and he had convinced himself that this was his calling to do, and he thought he had the moral authority to do these things. People like that are dangerous, and yet he's taught in history schools. He's revered by a lot of people that supported the North and the abolitionist movement. And the reality is there's other people out there that are better suited to be revered, like John Rankin, who, by the way, there's a great book out by a friend of mine, Caleb Franz, that you could check out if you wanted to read about it. Reverend John Rankin, who was one of the engineers of the Underground Rail, or conductor of the Underground Railroad. We make these choices, people make these choices based on what they perceive in the moment. And then again, what sells, right? Like what sells, what's popular, how how loud can somebody be about something, and how interesting is the story. John Brown's story is interesting. That's why people know about him. It's probably a little bit more interesting than John Rankin's story, but not much. You know, John Rankin was just a better human being, and he deserves more attention than we give to than John Brown gets. And you know, let's transition there, right? Because the last thing that we wanted to talk about was the piece in the middle.
Wait a second.
Go ahead.
I
Go ahead.
haven't had a chance to give my thoughts on the article yet.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
And it's only a couple, so it won't take long. But yeah, when I started reading this thing, I was reading her concept of a swarm. I'm thinking to myself, how does that differ from direct democracy? What she's talking about is removing the mediation so that the individual actor can make their choices known, and it's easy to opt in and opt out of this group or the other. So I'm thinking to myself, how does that differ from direct democracy as they practiced it back in Athens, right? We wouldn't be able to do it without the technology, but with the digital technology we have, maybe we could do it. And the difference is, and she makes this clear later on, AI, right? And just the speed with which information travels. That's what makes the difference. So then I'm thinking, as I'm reading this article, trying to come up with alternatives. And, you know, one thing I agree, we absolutely need to increase the size of the House. And the more I read about the dangers of AI, the more I think the increase needs to be huge, right? I've been a fan of the cube root rule forever. I've moved to double or the Wyoming rule times 2, or you know, those sorts of numbers. And now I'm thinking Article the First might be best to fight this AI, right? 6,000 of them. Offset the technocratic swarm with a representative swarm, using tools that Walter described earlier about, you know, a model trained on the Library of Congress with the ability to tweak it.
Yeah, if you're going to get to that if you're going to get to that number, it's got to be incremental. You're not going to do it overnight because you're never going to get the political support to do it overnight. So you have to have a plan.
I mean,
no,
I'm just saying
because
if he's going to
he's
do
not
it,
going to be able
to do it small.
Congress is going to be the one that's going to write the apportionment bill.
Oh, really? Are they going to stand up to Trump and say, we want to do this? Not the current Congress. They will do what he tells them to do.
Executive assistant Mike Johnson.
I think that he would run into some trouble in the Senate. So I don't think you're totally wrong. But you know, we also have midterms
like
coming
Susan
up,
Collins
right?
will be concerned?
2026. So I think
Susan
what
Collins
happens
is
in
always
2026
concerned.
is really going to show what is or is not possible.
Anyway,
All right.
so that's where I ended up with, was what we are advocating for is offsetting this technocratic swarm of her nightmares with a representative swarm, because again, she makes a comment somewhere in her writing about the representative form of democracy versus the swarm version of democracy. So I was trying to work that out, and there was a specific line in there that I actually wrote down. A body politic now predominantly formed by and for digital media consumption, right? And that's Walter's argument. The argument we've all internalized, but Walter articulated it first, was the two-way communication or education, right? That's what should be going on, but it's not. And the argument that back in the day, you know, prior to the 1929, back in that time frame, the most reliable source of information about government was your representative, the person who represented you. And we got away from that, as she correctly states, and we've also agreed, broadcast media played a big part. You know, when the representative doesn't have to shoulder that burden anymore because mass media is doing it, he has more time to get up to mischief, right? So there was, and to Harrington's credit, I mean, she advocates for a king, but she says it would be the least bad option. So she agrees it's not a great option, but she sees it as better than what we're advocating. So we're at odds on that one. And, you know, another thing in her article, she talks about how the individual became the unit of account in society, in our political. So we got away from community and went with more individual. And that has been at least part of the downfall, part of the problems that we've gotten to. And I find it hard to disagree with that, but there's a contrasting thought in my head from reading Harari, the Israeli historian Yuval Harari. I remember a quote from one of his books that says, "History has a direction, and it is in the direction of unity. It is towards unity." At one time, we had thousands of human settlements on the planet, each with no knowledge of the others, or maybe they knew the two neighboring groups, but they had no idea of all these other people. And now we have what? Fewer than 300 nations, and even those nations are allying themselves in NATO or ASEAN or other sorts of supernatural groupings. It is an inexorable move of humanity towards unity because there's safety in numbers. We want to be able to forcefully push back against the bad actors. So her argument I can't disagree with, but I do disagree because I've got this Harari vision in my head that I think is more correct. So I'm at a conundrum there.
That's very interesting. I'm reminded of a study where they looked at all of these homesteads on the range in the West. What they found was that over time, the homesteads on these multi-thousand acre ranches tended to end up moving closer to one another, right? Like people would end up moving their homes so that they were not quite so far away from their neighbor. Because there is this kind of collaborative spirit in the heart of humanity. Going back to this, the fundamental unit of account, is it the individual or is it, the community? And my belief increasingly is that the fundamental unit of account is representation, right? The fundamental unit of account is how many people are in like the smallest node of your representation of the sovereign nation of which you participate. And so I think that kind of puts it right in the middle, so that you maintain some level of individuality, but you are able to also, grow closer together with that two-way education.
All right, we're gonna transition, but I gotta pub this one more time because you brought it up. Whether you know it or not, you guys all need to read Orson Scott Card. You need to read the entire. So Ender's Game is technically not part of the. It's not technically part of the Shadow series, but it is a good set starter. I don't have the other one, which is Ender's Shadow, which is about Bean, and then we've got Shadow of the Hegemon. We've got Shadow Puppets, and we've got Shadow of the Giant. Everything that you guys are talking about is literally here. It is exactly what you're talking about. It's written in a fictional way about an alien invasion that brings humanity together and unifies, but it breaks apart after the alien invasion is gone. There's all these different power factions fighting for power, and there is a unifying voice trying to bring everybody back together and also spread people apart, because ultimately you're both right. People want power. They want to make decisions for themselves. They want self-government, right? But they also want to be, there's power in numbers. They want to be unified, right? There is this tension between these two things of living with other people and also being the one that makes all the rules. And when you get to Shadow of the Giant, I think it's brilliant. All right. And I'm not going to give it away but they talk about the bugger invasion and why the buggers failed at what they were trying to accomplish because they were a different species. But humans are a unique species that would actually be able to colonize other planets and spread apart and grow and unite all at once. If you look at the United States and the way that we spread across the country, and that, while it wasn't always peaceful, it created opportunity and prosperity for a lot more people. And that is actually a good thing. If we were actually able to, if we can turn Elon away from the politics and really get him focusing on getting us out into space, we can start to spread out these power factions away from each other. And then the people that are left can unite together in a representative democracy, united. They call it the free people of Earth in the Shadow of the Giant. But anyways,
okay.
I digress.
What's the first book? Where do we start? You just
read that. The one that I read is Ender's Game. I read Ender's Game first, and then Ender's Shadow second.
Okay.
Are these available in audiobook?
Yes, and they're actually fantastic. I was behind on my reading, and I had to audiobook part of Shadow of the Giant, and the voice actors for that, because they have different voice actors. So like, I wish I would have known for all the other books, because it was so cool having a different person read the different characters. I thought it was amazing. So and when you do go read them, you can go to my my other podcast, What the Book Podcast, with my friend Craig T. Stewart. We've read all these books. We've talked about all these books. You can listen to what we think about them after you read these books. I highly recommend reading these books. Anyways, let's
Okay.
get to that last thing that we wanted to talk about, the peace in the Middle East, the Gaza deal.
Yes.
We talked about, like, bad people do good things in history all the time. Okay. And I was listening to the Reagan Caucus podcast. They had Jonah Goldberg on this weekend. And Jonah kind of pointed out that Donald Trump is almost uniquely suited to working the Middle East, because he sees the world very similarly to the way that they see the world. It's all transactional. It's all about power. And so, while he, and I think most people, are maybe skeptical about lasting peace, because peace hasn't been lasted ever there, what is good is the fact that they got a deal done and they got the hostages home. So I'll kick it back to you guys. Just open up your thoughts. Walter, this was your topic, so I'll let you go first.
Yeah, I think the peace plan's got like 24 points or something like that. They've only
22.
accomplished the first 4, and so there's a lot more work to be done. But the hostages, the living hostages, have been returned. I don't think that the remains of the deceased hostages have been returned. The fighting has stopped. There is currently a pause, at least. And I would just say congratulations to the Trump team. I mean, they got it done. I think everyone acknowledges that without them, it wouldn't have happened, or not today, not under these terms. And that they have a lot of hard work ahead of them to get it done. But it's, I think everyone is relieved that it is, that there is progress. That's all I've got.
I'm glad it's over. It's been a horrible tragedy going on, and it certainly weighs on everyone's mind. What Hamas did to start the thing was horrible. Israel's response has been horrible. The whole thing's just a bloody Greek tragedy.
Yep.
And that's about as far as I'll go with it. And I'm glad I'm saying it's over. I'm glad the fighting, the killing is over. Will it take? Who knows? And what are the prospects for lasting peace for the Palestinians, for prosperity for the Palestinian people in that place or in some other place? I don't see good prospects at this point, so I don't know how this plays out long term.
Yeah, I mean, I echo those sentiments. Obviously, this is an amazing accomplishment, number one. And, as somebody who's been ridiculously critical of Donald Trump in the presidency in term 1 and term 2, I think this is something that deserves a lot of credit. And what I'll say is him pushing the credit onto Marco Rubio was a bit of humility that I think is rare, on rare display from him. And, maybe getting in his old age, maybe with the looming possibility of the Epstein files being released, maybe with, seeing the horrors of what this was and seeing something really good come out of it has maybe changed him inside. And I would say that would be a good thing. And, he made a comment about how Marco Rubio might go down as the greatest Secretary of State of all time. And while this is a great accomplishment, I don't think one accomplishment is going to get you the title of greatest Secretary of State of all time, especially when you're going up against people like John Quincy Adams. However, we are in a unique point in American history right now. I have an article coming out in Real Clear Politics on our Real Clear Defense on Wednesday, and there's a lot of parallels to what we're going through now to what happened to the lead up to World War One. And I think that if Marco Rubio understands this and can navigate these waters successfully to avoid a world war, then I think absolutely he could go down as in history as the greatest Secretary of State of all time. And I absolutely support that happening, because then we all win. Avoiding war is a great thing. And since we just saw this devastation, the attacks by Hamas, the response by Israel, I mean, nobody likes war. Nobody wins in war. And, I think that we would all be suited to find a diplomatic way to solve our problems rather than having to take up arms and fight against each other.
Well, Marco's the greatest Secretary of State right now. Next year, he'll do something that pisses Trump off. He'll be out.
Marco has like
new tricks.
He's got
Old
6
dogs
jobs
don't
right
learn
now.
new tricks. I know, but Trump's not going to change. You guys hold out your hope, but old dogs aren't going to learn new tricks at this point. Especially not the feedback he's been given. Why would he change anything he's doing? He's being constantly. They make golden idols of the guy. They worship him. Why would he change? It's ridiculous.
I mean, he's been talking a lot about God in heaven lately, and I will concur with Jeff's sentiment that he may be looking down the barrel of the Epstein release, and realizing he's got more to account for, both publicly but also eternally. And as one ages, one does. I do a fair amount of estate planning, and people, they do change later in life. Some don't, but some do. Is my observation, and maybe he will, maybe he won't.
Yeah, I think that comment on the plane when he was talking about going to heaven, as a Christian, I almost, I was just like, you are worthy of heaven. You've already been forgiven. If you're a Christian and you believe the gospel, then you're already forgiven and you are welcome in heaven, because we're all not really worthy of going to heaven, but we are forgiven to go. But my other thought was, this is somebody that maybe, because that was a bout of humility that is rare from him, for him to be like, I don't think that I'm worthy to go to heaven, and I don't think there's anything that can get me in there. And that made me think, well, he knows himself better than we do. And there are some ugly things that people could do that would make them not feel like they're worthy to be there. And it's possible, I think it's possible. Anything's possible, really. If I believe that Donald Trump can change and be a better person and usher in a new prosperity for peace, then I also believe that he has also done things that are maybe unforgivable from human perspective, but not unforgivable from a godly perspective.
Yeah, I always go back to John 8 these days, right? And an adultering woman is about to be stoned to death, and Yeshua says, may he who is without sin cast the first stone. And then he turns to the woman and says, are they condemning you? She says, no. And he says, I don't condemn you either. Now go and sin no more. And so I take a slightly different theological view. I do kind of think once you make the turn, the bar does raise, right? And this is like, once you exercise free will to choose to follow a path, you do need to work harder to choose it. That the amount that could possibly be forgiven, I think, in some ways, it raises as you become more aware of what is and is not true, at least for yourself, from an eternal perspective. But I personally am going to be praying for Trump to see the wisdom of giving away his kingly power to the swarm of uncapped representatives and the AI that is going to allow us to make it into this fantastic, unity without an alien invasion.
It's almost like he recorded this whole thing and then told AI to summarize. He covered everything we talked about. Walter's AI. Are you real, Walter? Like,
I am
pull your
real.
Mustache.
So Walter, there's a new movie that you have to check out. I don't know when it comes out, but I saw the trailer for it today. It's called Mercy. Have you seen this?
No.
All right, so it's Chris Pratt is a detective, and he stands trial accused of murdering his wife. He has 90 minutes to prove his innocence to the advanced AI judge he once championed before it determines his fate. And it's very clear that during the trial or during the trailer that it's not really about murdering his wife. There's this massive cover up that planted him there to like undermine the AI, whatever. So I'm
check it
sure
out.
that you will thoroughly enjoy it. It has very much a Minority Report
Okay.
esque feel to it, except it doesn't look as interesting as Minority Report. But maybe I'm wrong. I haven't seen the movie, so I can't judge yet. So we'll see. All right, guys.
Well, this was a
ahead.
lot of fun.
Yeah. Any last words before we check out for tonight?
Peace, love, and representation.
Those are my words. Roger?
Oh.
I love representation more than life itself. I need more. I need more.
All right.
Go
Well,
to our website. Soon there will be merch on the website. We'll let you know when that is. And don't forget to sign the Declaration of Representation.
that's right.
And I'll have y435.org on my sign this weekend, just so you know.
Awesome.
Drive traffic to the site.
So, and as we summarize, please go to our website, www.y435.org, sign our declaration, sign up to volunteer, or you can make a donation. And as always, peace, love, and representation.